On. Hello everyone. Hope everyone is doing great. Today with me is my friend Franco Davies, who just wrote and published a book, Swords of the Religion, which talks about the swords of Hospitallary Knights, and that's what he'll be telling us about today. Before we start, hello to everyone in the chat. Charlene, Colin, Cross from Campaign Terrain, Emma Davies, Zane Morgan, and who else is there? Oh, okay, Franco Davies already said hello to you, so I'm not saying hello again. And Noel Demicoli. Hi, Noel. So, I wanted to have this video here and ask Frank along because most of the people on this channel are gamers, and most of us love swords, so I thought this would be something right up our street. Before we start though, just wanted to make it a bit clear though, the religion or the Knights of St. John are technically a holy order. Hey Andre, hey, Master of Arms in the house.
Hello.
Okay, so when most gamers hear Holy Warrior, they probably think something along the lines of a paladin or something like that, you know, a bastion of goodness and morality and things like that. In the period we're discussing, the order is more like a bunch of extremely rich playboy warriors, so that might be a bit different. But anyway, Franco, on to you. First off, congratulations. It's been a long journey getting this published, yeah?
Yes, finally. In fact, I saw the image pop up while you were speaking, and but you stole the effect because I was going to do that.
Aw.
so, so that's the book. Um, but yes, it's. Shall I introduce myself as?
Oh,
So basically, let me introduce myself by means of the book. So the Swords of the Religion is a result of my master's thesis, which I did in 2014. Yes, quite a few years ago now.
it's 2004.
Um, uh,
That long already?
14 when I finished the course, yes. Um, and anyway, the course is interesting in itself because it's a master's course on hospitaller studies. So there are actually there's this course by the University of Malta that studies only the hospitaller order. Obviously, it's a history course because you know um, it's all history. Even though some people might know that the order still exists today, not in its military arm, but it's still in existence 900 plus years. So cutting 7 years short with Carl involved, the book eventually developed and grew, and this thesis grew and became this book, which just came out. There's some an interesting section in the middle where me and Carl and other of our friends, Sean, basically, me and Sean, get repeatedly stabbed by our maestro d'armi, Andre.
How is it the chat, by the way?
Who is what I'm saying is it has a small practical section where we sort of studied the weapon combinations and how the knights would have fought, basically, in the 16th century, to be specific. The book covers 3 centuries. Basically, the orders stay in Malta, so 1530s to 1790s. I don't know. Where should we? Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
that's
a picture of Franco before practice. After practice, he didn't look that
yes,
clean.
yes.
Okay, we could start with a brief introduction of the order for those who don't know about it, like why it was formed and what they did, basically.
hmm Um, so yes, I think there was someone who asked that actually about them.
Yes. Uh,
The origins of the Hospitaller Order, which, by the way, the official name is quite long. Some are they're known by many names, but the official name is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. That's the official name.
but they call themselves the
Um,
religion for short, yeah?
I actually am not sure if they still do now, but when they were, I could say it, no, when they were pretty badass, they were called the religion. So basically, when they were quite considerable and military force, even they called themselves in their archives just the religion, and even contemporaries like from other countries would say, "Oh, la religione, the religion is coming." So it's a bit like Judge Dredd, I am the law. and they used to say, I am the religion, simply because they claimed that title because they defended the religion, the Catholic faith, basically, at the time. It
But
started off from the first.
could you repeat,
Uh,
Franco, because the sound is clipping a little.
Oh, okay, sorry. So basically, they defended the Catholic faith because they were a military religious order. Uh, it was a Catholic order. Is the sound okay?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Um, so they were one of three major religious military orders originating from the First Crusade. One could say the Hospitallers were the first, because in the First Crusade in the 1090s, there was already a hospital formed. The founder is the official founder of the order, basically, the Blessed Gerard. He was not a warrior, he was a hospitaller. He had a hostel in Jerusalem and he welcomed and treated Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike. After the First Crusades, things got nasty and violent. And lots of Westerners suddenly remembered there was this Holy Land and decided to travel there for a religious holiday. And the need arose because obviously the road to Jerusalem was not the safest, because rightly so, the local population were not happy to have all their lands taken away from them. So there was the conflict, which we all know. The military orders formed because of the need to defend pilgrims.
Okay.
Templars are one of them.
Franco, we had a question by Liu Guin earlier, asking about doctrinal differences between them and, say, the Templars or the Teutonic Knights. Were there any?
Not much, actually, because they sort of influenced each other. There is a theory. Well, actually, it's not a theory. It's actual fact. The religious doctrine was Augustinian, an Augustinian doctrine. Simply because you have to think where we are in history. It's a period where religious orders were still very monastic, meaning locked up in a monastery and praying and writing treatises and stuff like that, and making beer and praying. I can't remember the name now, but the religious orders which go out into the world and help people, like the Franciscans, and then there were the Dominicans, the Dominican order, which were a preaching order. Those came after. So in the 1090s, one could say that the Knights of St. John, which were the Hospitallers, another name, and the Templars and the Teutonics were the first religious orders to go out into the world.
Rather than just staying in a monastery and praying, you mean?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And they mixed with people. The Hospitallers were the first because they started as a hospital, and in a hospital you have to mix with people. So
fair enough, yeah.
And they started as amateur monastic people. They didn't say, okay, let's found this order. They were doing things before founding officially.
Okay.
I think 20 years passed until the Pope sort of gave them the papal bull. It was 1113 that the Pope sort of recognized the Hospitallers as an official order.
Okay.
So Templars and Hospitallers are very similar.
Okay. Hi to Michael in the chat, and Colin has a good question here, which I think is relevant to this. How did folks join the order back in the day? Could anyone serve the order?
Yes. But it depends how much money and how much pedigree you have. But still, yes. So I'm seeing Teutonics as well mentioned here. So just before I mention that, the Hospitallers, the Templars, and the Teutonics were the three major religious military orders. So religious order with the religious statute, and they had to pray every morning, etc. The usual stuff monks would do. But these had the military was original at the time. Well, it's original even now. I mean, it was particular to those three. And then you had all these chivalric orders forming after that. So national chivalric orders, like the knighthood of the British Crown, that concept came after. One would have thought that it came before, but the only chivalry that existed before was Charlemagne and his sort of
The code of his peers
group
and
of
yeah.
warriors. Exactly. That's like was the origin, and then these guys came along, and the Crusades helped sort of create that. So, actually, forgot your question.
He was saying, how did folks join the order, and
Oh yes, oh yes,
how could anyone serve?
yes. I mean, Templar is the same. I'll talk about hospitals because I can claim knowledge on those more. You had levels, and to become a Knight of Justice, which is the coolest sounding title, and it's also the most powerful title, meaning that you could become a grandmaster, you could become a general, you could rise up into the ranks. To become a Knight of Justice, one had to be noble, full stop. And it's understandable at the time because nobles were the military class in medieval culture. We did not have standing armies. You had nobles who led the fight and forced their locals to sort of pick up arms and join them as a militia. So knights had to be noble, but there weren't enough nobles to go by. That was always the case. So you would have sergeants at arms, which, if you looked at them on the battlefield, would look, in the medieval times especially, would probably look very similar. The only thing which we would probably recognize a Knight of Justice from a sergeant at arms would be that the Knight of Justice would have more shiny,
Bling,
more
basically, yeah.
expensive weapons and armor. But they would still all be on horseback or on foot, whatever the case. But then you had the third classification of the order, which were the chaplains, which are basically what a normal religious order would be. Priests, basically. And those would not fight. Those were just chaplains. That's why they were called that. You had other titles, but those were honorary titles.
Like a Knight of Grace or things like that?
Yes. I don't know, people would have heard of the painter Caravaggio. He's one of the most famous because he was made a Knight of Grace because of his work in Malta, sort of. He was given that title. He could not become a Knight of Justice because he was not noble. Actually, I'm not sure if it was Knight of Grace or of Obedience, but an honorary title. There's another wing which people do not know much about, but it's actually one of the strongest wings in modern day hospitaller order, which is basically what me and Carl could become if we want to, which would become a member of the order, not a knight.
If we could afford it.
Yeah, exactly. You still have to be quite rich, and you have to sort of give a service, etc. They were called donuts, not donuts. Donuts, D-O-N-A-T.
Okay, you got me there for a second.
Because they would have given a donation, and they would have, I don't know, imagine you're a very rich merchant in Venice, and you donate a whole building to the order to set up a hospital. You obviously deserve something, so they make you a donut. A donut. I'm going to stop saying that.
Yeah.
So they make you a member of the order, but not a knight. So knights that fight in battle, there's only one, Knights of Justice, and then they had servants at arms or sergeants at arms, because numbers were limited.
You mentioned nobility, but I think at some point they said they had taken on like, okay, you have to be this noble to get in here, like you have to have 4 generations or something like that. But I think that's later.
Yes. Then it became ridiculous because you had, imagine soccer, or American football, or imagine a Premier League, and you had all these orders, these military orders, and Templars and Hospitallers were on top of the league, and everybody wanted to become one. So because the interest was so high, they obviously made it. You would have to be really good and really noble to join them, basically, if you know what I mean. So yeah, like the German Lang, because Germany had a really, really, really high number of nobility, because like every 100 miles you would have a prince or a king, because Germany was a group of the system was different. That's why it was called an empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which grew because there was lots of nobility there. So in order to filter out, they made 8. You had to have 8. I'm not remembering exactly, but 8 levels of generations of nobility. Italy needed less because there were each country had its own
Okay.
number of nobles to play around with. So, and actually, that's something which I maybe would have to say. Templars and Hospitallers alike were the only, not the only two, but the two major ones, which were multinational. The Teutonic Order was mainly Germanic. So the Teutons were Germanic, they still exist, and they still are a Germanic order. The Templars and the Hospitallers, mainly French, because France was the most populous and chivalric, and that produced knights at the time, basically. But you had Auvergne, part of France, Provence, Castile, Italy, Germany, Britain. So those were all nations which could join the order. And in fact, in the 1300s, the order decided to group these into langs, lang as in meaning languages. So you would have, it was more organized. It had 8 langs. Some say that's where the 8-pointed cross sort of comes from, but no, that was there before. But conveniently, the 8-pointed cross represents the 8 languages of the order, the 8 nations.
Okay, so we have two questions here which are kind of related. Did these orders aid or work with each other throughout the years? And could one be a member of multiple orders or a donut?
So the Hospitallers and the Templars were rivals, but they never, well, officially clashed and killed each other on the battlefield. They were always allies, but they let's put it nicely, they disliked each other. Simply because they were the two most powerful military presence in the Holy Land. So we're talking Crusades still now, because the Templars obviously were they ceased to exist after the early 14th century. So in the Holy Land, they were the only two reliable armies, because you had this group of men living in a monastery in their castle, and they were reliable. They were always there. A noble who comes for a crusade comes, spends a few years, and leaves. And and it's not. So these two great orders were given lots of property and castles in the Holy Land by the king of Jerusalem, who needed them. So they didn't really like each other much, because if
So they're
the
kind of
king gives the
competing, yeah?
Hospitallers, yeah, I mean, what an absolute. I mean, he gave the Hospitallers, cracked the Chevalier. That's huge castle. He gave us this tiny little tower. What a bastard! So there was that rivalry.
Okay,
But
then
they fought together. I mean, in this numerous sieges and battles where they fought alongside.
then again,
I think in the yep.
I think there was also the Order of Saint Lazarus, which was kind of a spin-off of the.
Yes, yes. You had many orders coming out then. I think there's an image somewhere, but anyway, it
Let
doesn't,
me
it's not
find it.
important.
Whoop.
With sort of the military
There we go.
orders that came out of there.
Yeah, it's on screen now.
Oh, okay. So yeah. I better open it up so I remember what I'm talking about.
Let me move it. 1 second.
Yeah, that's one. Yes, perfect. So I can see it. Yeah. So Knights Hospitaller, black with white 8-pointed cross. Knights Templar, the red cross, and Order of Saint Lazarus. Also, you can see the dates there. They're all quite early. And the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, yes, fine, but they weren't really that powerful. And that is where it started to become a bit national. Um, uh, but the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre survive today as a religious sort of military order. What I mean by national are the ones on the bottom row, because those are the famous Spanish religious military orders. So the Spanish wanted to be original, and they created their own. The Order of Calatrava, the Order of Santiago, the Order of Alcantara being the most famous. The reason being, you have to look at history. There was the Crusades happening in the West, in the East, sorry, in the east of the Mediterranean, which the main players were Hospitallers, Templars, and then there were the Teutonics and St. Lazarus. And on the West, at the same time, there was the Reconquista, the Spanish um, battle against always the Muslim enemies, which were actually established as a sultanate in Spain, but they were trying to reclaim Spain back. So the religious orders, military orders, were formed for that. Could you be a member of both orders? Definitely not. It was a very clear statute requirement. You could not be married. You could not have uh, any court case on your head. Obviously, you had to have a nice clean sheet, basically. And you could not be a member of another religious order, any religious order, not just Templar. You could not be a Franciscan friar and say, "Oh, I want to become a Templar."
I imagine it would be. I mean, being in an order is like a 24-hour job. You're not off the clock at any time.
um, in that time, yes. Then obviously in the Maltese periods, no.
No.
And then most, yeah, then it became complicated. Then, so I don't know.
Yeah, lots of things did.
I can actually say why, because
Mhm.
in the Crusades, it was a bunch of nobles, playboy nobles, basically, yes, trying to be holy, and um, they were in the Holy Land. When that failed, sort of, after 200 or 300 years, and all the Europeans from the Holy Land spread back into Europe then. By that time, the Hospitallers and the Templars, but then they sort of ceased to exist abruptly. They had loads of property all over Europe. They were like, it was a very, very, very rich order. And you needed people to run this property. So the order had a system where if I'm a knight and I do a few successful missions, sort of, with the order, I claim the right to be given a property. And that would be called a commandery. And then basically I just go in France or Italy, wherever that commandery is, and I run it for a few years. And I basically live in that town as a nobleman, but not married. And then be called back to Malta or Rhodes at the time, wherever they would have been, in times of crisis. But in peacetime, they would be in their home country, taking care of their property or this property.
Okay, so let's switch to the weapons, which is basically what we're interested
Yes.
in and what your book is about. So we can actually start with one of the questions again from Liu Guin. Let me find the question. Swords, are there any idiosyncrasies associated with their weaponry that marks them out? Also, Are there any metallurgical distinctions to them, or economic distinctions? Did they have preferred suppliers, or was there no pattern to procurement? And is it valid to ask, if I were to look at any given Knight of St. John in any given historical period, could I ask why they have got that sword and not any other sword in particular?
So that is very well. First of all, I'm no expert in that. There are people studying only that, for example. But obviously, I was exposed to it with my research, and the same as Carl is, and most of us practicing here in Malta, we're exposed to hospitaller swords, obviously, because we like to
Actually, I can throw this in the
learn
chat.
how they're used.
Let me throw some eye candy in the background.
Oh, okay. So yes, the simple answer is not unfortunately, that's how it was. No. There were no particular swords which one could say, oh, this is definitely a hospitaller sword, or else like you would see in modern wall hanger swords, decorative swords. It would be titled like Templar swords or Hospitaller swords. Not really, no. It was the reason being is it was a multinational organization. The members came from all over Europe. So a Spanish knight would want, usually, would want Spanish weapons. An Italian knight they would want to use what they relate to. So there wasn't really any specific weaponry associated. The only thing is, you might see them in some of the passing images, they would have engraved the 8-pointed cross.
We do have a close-up of that coming up.
Yeah. So when you see that, it means that, yes, it was ordered. Because what the order would do, it would make an order as in purchasing order, no, not a military order, a purchasing order of a couple of thousand rapiers, for example. Oh, yeah, that's the one. And then obviously, because they are ordered by the hospitaller order, they would be sort of marked as their property. But personal swords belonging to knights, not really. I mean, we have the perfect example is the Grandmaster de Valet's side sword, which has no markings pertaining to the order at all.
Could you repeat that, Franco? Because again, the sound cut off a little.
If you were a noble high-end knight, you would probably buy your own swords, and they wouldn't have any markings belonging to the order. The perfect example is Grandmaster de Valet's sword, which is in Malta, and it has no markings, basically. It has markings, but not hospitaller.
Okay, it's on screen right now. And
that's the one.
Again, we had the opportunity to actually hold this and handle this, and it really is a fantastic sword.
I have it hanging here. Not the original. you have one behind.
It's not within reach, so if you want to show yourself, go right ahead.
Well, I mean, it's in the image. I mean, but no, well, actually, maybe see it in someone's hand. Because someone did comment about the hilt. So this is a replica, which is basically our club, which we call our club sword. So it's a side sword, and it's held like that, or like that. Well, not a fist grip like a Crusader medieval sword. It's more of an early rapier, which today we would call a side sword. 16th century.
We're not hearing you, Franco.
It's a 16th century sword. Mid 1500s. So yeah, I mean, for example, that sword belonged to a particular knight, and there's no other sword like it in the palace armory, for example.
That particular sword was actually a Grandmaster sword, yeah?
Yes, I mean that is the one that, and actually, on in the book, I looked for proof of this claim, of this tradition that belongs to the Grandmaster, and there is proof in a marble plaque underneath the sword because it's actually hanging in a chapel. And a few days ago, while I was signing copies of my book, a guy working in the office of the publishing house said, "Do you know what I found? I was looking for an archive of a statue, and I found reference to that sword in the 1600s. So there is written proof that it belongs to the Grandmaster.
You'll have to make publish a second edition now.
We might as well throw it away now."
Okay,
But
actually,
anyway, that's the beauty of research, because you always discover new things.
that's interesting because that's kind of a relic or gift sword which we'll circle to back later. But in the meantime, we have a question from Andre. What happens to the sword when the knight dies?
Oh yes, okay. Um, so the Knights of Saint John, the Knights Hospitaller, the sovereign military the Knights of Saint John, let's call them that, like the Templars, had the vow of celibacy and poverty and obedience, etc.
Okay,
So they had vows, like
coming
monks.
coming up on screen is a picture of someone with a vow of poverty. The Grandmaster.
Oh, yeah, all right, there you go. Yes, I was worried there because I mentioned celibacy, and I said, "What are you going to post?"
No. There wasn't much celibacy
Um,
either, but yeah, that. This is the picture of someone with a vow of poverty.
Yes. Well, that's nasty because you put the most pompous of them all.
Oh, okay, let's find one which is less pompous, maybe.
He was really famous. He wanted to be a prince, basically, and from Grandmaster, he changed his title to Prince, basically.
As one does.
But anyway, so yes, yeah. I mean, okay, fair enough. That armor would have cost a couple of hundred peasants' lives in wages, I'm sure. These were noble people, so they could never be poor. So to answer Andrei's question, the vow of poverty still means that today, means that you can enjoy all the property the order has, which at the time and today is a lot. You could live as a rich lifestyle as you want, as long as you're obedient to the order, okay. But when you die, you have no legacy. You have no financial legacy. You have to leave everything to the order. So, 90, trying to remember, 90% property is taken by the order. It's given back. I'm not sure about the percentage, but I think, yes, 10% or the quinta, a fifth you could give to a nephew or a niece or an illegitimate son or anyone you want. But most of your property would have to be claimed back by the order. That's why poverty. So most of the swords would be given back. This one wasn't, because the Grandmaster decided to donate it to Our Lady of Damascus, to Holy Mary, basically, in the church. And nobody's going to take a sword from the Holy Mary, so it was given as a donation. So it was given as a donation while he was alive to a church, so couldn't be touched. That's why it stayed there and wasn't lost in time. To answer the other question, that sort of, if you were sort of living at the time, what would you say? I have got that sword or the other. There's a little quote. Yes, I can read a sentence of a German nobleman who visited Malta in the 1600s. Um, and yeah, he describes like these knights when he came to the island, and he says one guy had a Florentine sword, while other Germans within the group were described as carrying plain German swords, whatever they were. And Grandmaster Winiacourt, the Grandmaster at the time, was described as carrying a strong French sword with a richly chased hilt. So each one had his own, I guess. I mean, people would order from the best swordsmiths in Europe at the time and flaunt it.
Yeah,
It was a status symbol.
there's a related question. Would they have a dedicated swordsmith? Question from Dungeon Matron. Would they have a dedicated swordsmith, or would they use whatever local smiths nearby?
That's not entirely well. It's not straightforward. Basically, one could say that Malta, when they were in Malta as a headquarters, we have no evidence of a swordsmith bodega from A to Z. So there's no famous reference. There's no reference to a famous swordsmith creating swords from scratch in Malta. But you had spadari, or what one would case sword smith, I guess. But they wouldn't create them. They would maintain them. They would probably put the parts together. The order usually got their swords from the best places in Europe, from Italy, from Spain, from Germany. I mean, Carl, you can remind me as well. There's a couple of famous names in our palace army. There's Piccioni swords, Italian.
Mainly Piccioni. There are quite a few from Toledo.
Toledo and
General Toledo. There isn't any specific smith in Toledo. And Martin Ruiz, which actually
Ruiz, yes.
Yeah, there's one sword which is actually marked Espadero del Rey, King's swordsmith.
Yeah.
So it's like I think they got it from whichever was most expensive, literally.
I mean, they could afford it, so
yeah.
why not? And it was a status symbol. It was also the best quality sword at the time.
Good point. So. And realistically, I think it's not that they could afford it. I think it's that they couldn't afford to have something cheaper because of their status and their prestige.
Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing Neil said he was a prince. Well, yes, he was a prince. I mean, about the Grandmaster. To be fair, the Grandmaster before him claimed the title of prince, and sort of Pinto obviously said, "Okay, then I'll keep it." And
that's okay. I mean, he did have a very pretty palace.
Okay.
So, while we're still on the subject of swords, I think, let me see. Yeah, Rob asked about...
I'm seeing the palace. Okay.
Sword length. De Grassi says use what is reasonable. Capoferro says killing to tip is as long as your arm. Giovanni says the sword doesn't matter. What's your opinion on the topic? And what's a normal sword for this period?
Well, I mean, first of all, if Andre is still hearing, I'm going to get nervous now because that's something he would be more qualified in answering, being a fencing master. But it depends on the period and the context one would be using the sword in. You wouldn't want to use a very, he mentioned, 74-inch rapier. You wouldn't want to use a 74-inch rapier in a galley fight. In battle on a galley.
Yeah, that would be rather inconvenient.
So you have that's where cutlass came out from, because obviously space was an issue, and there are quite a few examples of galley swords in the armory. You showed them previously. So I mean, okay, this debate probably, in my opinion, always revolves around rapier mainly,
Mostly I
and
think so, yeah.
yeah, because
No,
you
not
don't
this
really hear
one.
that debate in longsword, because if a longsword is really long, it becomes not something else, a two-handed sword. And in side sword, a bit like it's a battle, it's a battle sword. You would want it to be a bit shorter so that you can sort of
Yeah,
defend
it would be
better
very
and strike.
inconvenient with shields and stuff, for example.
Exactly, exactly. It would be messy. But rapier, and that was Neil, by the way, on the right. And the gentleman in black is our maestro Andre. So that is the side sword, basically. That's why I wanted to show these. So it's a shorter weapon and used with a shield, and that's the side sword was shorter, and it was used in the Great Siege.
Okay, and you
In
still
the
don't.
rapier, yep.
I said you still don't want to have it too short, or because you could end up with surprise dentistry.
Yes.
Okay, and
Um,
that's Andre demonstrating surprise dentistry on me.
oh yes, exactly. So yeah, you don't want a long sword in battle because you need, the sword is used as a complete object as a weapon. But when talking about rapier, okay, fine. We can maybe all agree that from the Grassi up to Capoferro and further on, rapiers got longer. And then they got shorter again, becoming small swords. And the fighting became more linear. But this is all around dueling, basically. Um, the curious thing is, exactly, that in the palace armory, we have loads of long rapiers.
Some of
And
them are
that is
crazy long, yeah.
actually, yeah, and it's actually curious because in Malta, as in the rest of Europe, dueling was illegal. I mean, this this conception that dueling was allowed in the nobility, it's wrong. Dueling was always illegal. It was just ignored sometimes. And sometimes when the authorities want to make an example, they'll make an example. But it was not something which one could do in the open, and definitely not something which the government at the time would say, "Oh yeah, let's order all these dueling rapiers for our knights to kill each other with." It's what a historian, well, my mentor, Dr. Buttigieg, calls disruptive violence. The knights were violence was their job, but it had to be productive violence. Dueling was disruptive. You killed your ally. Um,
Yeah, and damages property and destroys
yeah,
things. There was that incident in 1581, I think. No, no.
in Malta, the
Yeah, yeah, the time that those two knights quarreled over a courtesan and it ended up with cannons being fired in the city and
oh yeah, that was after the Great Siege, 1560 something, 1566, 68. Yeah, obviously, because you have an island full of hotheads, full of
highly
young
skilled hotheads,
noble,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, and young noble playboys, and they were also the best warriors in Europe at the time, and they were all in national, probably not probably, quite racist groups. Like group, the Spanish group, the Italian group, the French group. So it wasn't easy, I guess, to keep them all at peace. Um, yeah, in Malta there were laws about rapier length, by the way, because I know it was mentioned. So, for example, let me check. In England in 1550s, swords were limited to a yard's length. Same in Malta. There were similar impositions. So in 1574 in Malta, they imposed the length of 4 palms for any sword to be carried in public. For the same reasons, they didn't want people with long rapiers dueling all over the place, basically. But you could not remove a sword from a knight because that would destroy his status. In fact, sorry to keep talking, but in fact, the Valletta, which was the capital in Malta, I mean, as it is today, which was actually officially a convent. So the whole city was a convent. It's the only convent in the world which had prostitutes and taverns and hotels. But anyway,
Yeah, it sounds
but
like
it
that
was
thing from
officially a convent.
Futurama.
Yeah, exactly. It was referred to as the convent city. In the convent city, no weapons were allowed, apart from a sword and a dagger in the hands of a knight. If you were a civilian, you would be arrested.
What about I don't know, guards or police or security or whatever? No weapons either.
Oh no, people in military duty
Okay.
had to have a weapon, but people off duty, even a knight couldn't waltz around St. George's Square with an arquebus, with a gun in his hand. He
Yeah,
would be
fair
he would
enough.
be arrested by the military police version of the time, by the knights themselves, obviously, because they wouldn't want an Italian knight to go and shoot the head of a Spanish rival who just slept with his girlfriend or something like that. So
Okay, Andre just said the rapier was the most common sidearm to be carried around in a civilian environment, not specifically for duels.
yes, sorry, yeah. So a rapier was full stop a civilian weapon. So you would carry it around, as I just said, basically, exactly. A knight would be walking around Valletta with a rapier. They wouldn't be carrying a heavy side sword or a heavy long sword or like the Witcher with the long sword on their back, for example. And the rapier obviously then became a status symbol, and the more it was decorated, the more of a status you had, still with a lethal blade. And that's what created the difficult fine line of self-defense versus dueling. Um, if a knight was attacked by a bunch of drunk locals in one of the taverns in Valletta and he killed them, it's okay because he was defending himself. If he sort of made an appointment with his colleague and went out onto the bastions and did an official duel, they would be arrested. But yeah, probably they would be released again. But anyway, at least an example would have been made.
Yeah, they would
Do
be.
you have a picture of the beautiful rapier, for example? I'm
Which
not sure I
one?
sent it to you. Oh no, I didn't. Damn it.
Which one, Franco? Maybe
I
I
did
went
not send
to.
it to you. Might as well open the book.
The one from the Cathedral Museum.
Yep.
The one from the Cathedral Museum. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you move it a bit to the right? Sorry, left. There you go.
Okay. So that is a rapier belonging to a grandmaster. It's the blade is Orlando Ruiz, by the way.
Which is a royal swordsmith.
Yeah, and obviously the hilt is what you see, like beautiful crafted silver. But still a weapon.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's super pretty doesn't mean it's not a really good blade.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay, so speaking of, we're talking about the knights, we're talking about swords. What about how they were training? Because we mentioned battlefield training and dueling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Sorry, I got convenienced by D6 crafting damage. Getting excited there.
Yeah, that's exactly what we sound like every time we see a new sword. Sword.
Um, so, your question about military training, right?
Training in general, yeah. I mean, like, how did they train? What did they use? Because you don't use a sword for everything. They had to have other weapons, yeah. And we know we have
Yes.
crossbows and muskets in the armory, so
So what made them special as an order, also the Templars, but obviously we have to speak about Hospitallers because they survived. And the Templars ended in the 1309, Friday the 13th, etc. So that's when the Templar Order was dissolved violently. The Hospitallers survived till the 1800s. So they had this culture of military excellence up to Napoleon, basically. How did they do that? Well, actually, by being, in that aspect at least, very strict. So one could not join the order if he had a disability, because obviously, if you have to be a soldier, they could become a chaplain, a priest in the order. So there was like fitness levels,
Okay.
One could not join the order if he was broke, because you would have to supply your own. You have to bring your own weapons with you, basically. You don't just go and say, "Give me weapons." But also, then they had the novitiate training, which was quite intense. Basically, would become like any student of today. You're at their mercy, and novices had to train every day, basically. Apart from other education.
I think you had mentioned at one point that French and Italian novices in particular had to be told not to train so much or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reference to the French knights, which were so annoying because they kept training after sunset, for example, because they were so eager. And what made the order work perfectly was you had national rivalry. And they held tournaments every 3 months. So we lost against the Spanish. Damn it! Let's train harder. So in the 3 month in the next tournament, we will win again. So these were obviously strict, as all tournaments in Europe, with rules, so they don't kill each other. But yeah, they had to train regularly. There were fencing masters employed. There's one particular reference which names the fencing master by name in 1570s. And I'm trying to find from my favorite finds of the book. Well, I might as well read it. Fra Sabba Castiglione, you know him well, and Andre. He was a knight in mid 1500s, and he wrote this manual of how to become a good knight. It was called My Memories, I Ricordi. And there's everything in it: how to behave in front of women, how to be sort of, gentlemanly, how to manage your money, how not to fall onto temptation, etc. And one was regarding physical exercise. And the statutes of the order actually follow his quote quite to the letter. So just to read a part, shall I?
Please do.
So I encourage you every morning after having heard Mass and said the office, which you are obliged to do. So he reminds them, it's like, hey. So every morning to exercise with weapons, and then he gives a long list. I'm not going to read it all, such as swords and large bucklers, sword and square shields, sword and round shield, sword and cape. And when you are big in stature, he specifies two-handed sword, pike, poleaxe, and mace. And then he continues, you will enjoy throwing the spear, the javelin, shoot the crossbow, the musket, and the Turkish bow. And the list goes on, basically.
I think he also mentions some non-weapon stuff with regards to stuff they should train regularly.
Okay, I might as well read the next sentence.
Go ahead.
So you will enjoy wrestling, running, jumping a hurdle, grappling with daggers, and other short weapons, so you can use them when you are cornered, obviously. So basically, these were like commandos, they trained every day on everything. And his last sentence is exactly what you meant before. In short, he says, you will enjoy to handle averagely every manner of weapon, so that when needed, you would know how to use all these weapons, which not by choice, but by fate, you will have to handle, because only then one knows a good knight in arms. Obviously,
I
because
I think
makes
that,
sense.
yeah, I think that's interesting because often you see this trope in fiction, like it. Okay, this guy has been studying the same single weapon for 30 years, only knows that weapon, but he's the absolute master of that weapon. But mostly you see, I think both in Sabba di Castiglia and Baldassare Castiglione, no, practice everything because the time will come when you will need a weapon and you do not have that weapon at hand.
Exactly, exactly. He mentions Turkish bow, for example. I mean,
Yeah, which is. I don't think we have any bows in the armor, to be honest. Yeah? We have crossbows, but not bows.
bows, I don't think so. No, in that there's a showcase with Turkish weaponry. No, no, there isn't. There's the muskets, obviously, which are beautiful, but bow, no. Oh,
Uh,
like,
we have more questions. One from Noel. Can you please expand on the tournaments?
oh, pretty. I like that. Um, Tournaments were multifaceted in Malta with for the order, because it was one, a way of examining the novices, in peacetime,
Okay.
without sort of sending them out in battle and, oh, he died. And better say he failed than you have to repeat in 3 months' time. Um, but it was also a very important propaganda tool, like in the European kingdoms. You would show the locals the power of these lords, these knights.
Like, yeah, we
Um,
do not want to revolt. They have swords and we know
exactly.
how
I
to use them.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was a show of force and pageantry, and pageantry is all that basically. The local noble strata sort of establishing their superiority, basically. But it was also something of a show for the local population, basically. They were invited to come and see these lords doing their job. They say, okay, they're not just drinking and gambling; they actually do sweat and bleed, and they're defending us. So how nice of them. So tournaments had a very strong political relevance, and they were held in all feast days in Malta, basically. So in Carnival, I'm actually not sure in Christmas; it's never mentioned. But
Okay.
in the other feasts, yes.
So,
In the very holy days, they weren't held, even in Easter time, actually.
so how did the
But
tournaments play out? What would they do exactly?
so you had tournaments on horseback, which is the traditional bog standard movie list sort of tournament,
Okay.
with um, oh my god, with the pole arms on horseback, and then you had I don't know if some people might have seen it in Italy today in Siena. There would be like a target with a wooden hand and a ring, and the knight has to sort of gallop, and it was called the anello, because they would have to aim with their spear and sort of hit this ring, for example. You had target practice, which was also in the tournament setup,
Mm-hmm.
and with muskets, basically. In the Maltese period, it was muskets, not bows and arrows. And then you had foot tournaments, which was actually the most important, because knights in Malta fought mostly on foot.
Or on
They
ships. Yeah.
didn't do, or on the ship, yeah, on the galleys on foot, basically. So the armor would be lightweight. They wouldn't have the heavy leg armor, because they would be standing over a wall, usually in a fort, defending themselves. And on a galley, you wouldn't want to clonk around with heavy armor. So leg armor usually wasn't used. Leg armor is very important on horseback, but I mean, usually it would be a breastplate, maybe some lower leg armor and the arms basically,
Uh,
and
uh,
gorget and helmet. But they would do these foot tournaments basically, and it's described that they would be wearing only the upper. It just says simply without the leg armor in old Italian.
Okay, that's interesting because you mentioned quite a lot of horseback activity, and I don't remember seeing riding or jousting in the Castiglione. It might have
In
been
a book?
mentioned
No,
in Sabba di Castiglione. I know he mentions
no.
swimming with a weapon and shield, but not riding actually.
Castiglione mentions that you have to know how. Well, it's actually interesting with Castiglione when he mentions it. He said
Hmm.
basically we're living in Malta and we don't ride horses much. But then he says, I can actually remember it. Since we are a chivalric order,
Oh,
you should at least, and he actually says that. He says, you should at least know how to ride a horse because your honor depends on that. So if
God.
they see a knight like, not knowing how to ride a horse, like, yeah, seriously. But no, Castilla doesn't mention training on horseback at all because what we said, training on foot was more important. Um, but they still kept jousting to even the 1700s.
I think it's
Um,
kind of part of the whole noble thingy. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, jousting, as everyone might know, who would be interested in it, became a sport then. One could say, along with wrestling and the other fighting arts, sort of, one could say it was the first sport in Europe, sort of, and then other sports came along like tennis, etc., which was also medieval. But jousting was always there. Point system, rules, etc.
Okay, Noel mentioned regarding bows. There was a longbow
Oh,
documented in the armory list in 1800.
ah.
Yeah, wonder where that ended up. Okay, and Khalil said, what type of musket did they train on? I'm not sure if you have any background on that because it's not really your area. But,
No, no.
but
Um,
we do have some more eye candy for that. So yeah.
okay. Basically, they just followed the technology of the time. I mean, very amateurly put. They used whatever Europe used at the time. And when flintlock were used, they used flintlock. When wheel lock, they used. I mean, they were always on the forefront. So the only thing I can answer, the sword gun just passed there.
Oh yeah, let's bring that
Yeah,
one
yeah,
because
no, no.
I really love that one.
So, and I actually, I'm quite sure there was no specific, like the swords, there was no specific musket which hospitallers used. Um,
Yeah, so I think again it's a case of the
it's,
most expensive one they could find.
yeah, and the best.
Oh yeah.
They were pioneers in fortification building from the Crusades because they were small in number and they attracted a lot of attention from hostiles because they were so effective. They had to learn how to defend themselves. So they were experts in how to fight against huge odds. So fortification building you know, was their top notch. And the best engineers would sort of go and work with the order and claim that, it was something really, they could flaunt it basically. Um, so muskets and before muskets, arquebus were very important, and it's written everywhere that a knight had to know how to use them because that's a very important part of fortification siege warfare. Swords, as Andrei can explain better, were used in melees when you when muskets haven't done their job and the armies have clashed, basically. Otherwise, you don't use a sword in battle.
Okay, there's a comment by Neostus. You mentioned they had rigorous training both in faith and fighting. How committed were they to this training? Secondly, was there weapon priority training specific to Malta and any casualties documented?
Oh, yes. So hold on. So lots of very good questions there. So rigorous training. Yes, at least when novices, because then once a knight became professed, they had a bit more freedom. But they still had much more commitment and obedience than the general nobility at the time. Don't forget, there were no standing armies in this time. Then they started developing in the military revolution in the 1500s. But before that, it was all militia. These were an order, so they had to obey orders. For example, about novices. So they present, in order to profess, they have to exercise with arms 3 days a week and in their logbook before releasing them of the occupation they hold. So there was an organized system. If you don't log that you trained, you don't pass the exam. You don't become a knight. I don't know. There's loads of quotes on that. So the other question. So yes, regular training is what I just mentioned. So obviously training regularly makes you better. Secondly, was there weapon priority training specific to Malta? No, as we said, there wasn't really anything specific. As we mentioned earlier, the horseback charge was useless in Malta. One would do sorties on horseback, but the cavalry charge on a battlefield, on an island, and in warfare on sea was useless. So you wouldn't see training on cavalry charges in Malta. You would see more target practice on muskets, as you mentioned, needs to be done regularly, and sword fighting, etc. In Holy Land, then you had a lot of actually in the Holy Land it's simpler because the weapon choices were less, as in there weren't muskets, etc. So you would have sword and shield, mace and shield, spear, and that's it. And then I'm not sure if they would have used the bow and arrow. I'm not sure about that.
Why not?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I would assume yes. I mean, the same concept. If in the 1600s a knight is expected to use any weapon, I don't think they would snob a bow and arrow a few hundred years before. That's why they were so successful. They were practical.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And casualties in training, definitely, yes. What's great about hospitaller studies is that they were also pioneers in bureaucracy. They kept records for everything, which is great for a historian because you have written evidence of everything. There's one mention, I can't find it offhand, but I remember about a knight who I'm quite sure he sort of severely injured his hands, probably amputation or something, because he had to stop training. He had to stop training to become a knight because a musket exploded and in his hands and he damaged his hand. And it is written that they and knights losing their life. Yes, I mean that was an honor for them. These were still up to the 1700s. These were still of the mindset of being holy warriors and dying for the religion, for this holy order and for the Catholic faith. For them was an honor. And you have actually books written about these young knights who died and in service, for example. But injuries and deaths during training, yes. Um, more injuries than deaths, luckily. But
I mean, you get lots of people practicing with weapons for a long time. There will be accidents. It's a question of when, not if.
yes, exactly.
Especially with 16th century health and safety standards. So, yeah.
To be fair, yeah, I'm pretty confident. I can say that not much actually, which were obviously registered and logged. Um, so smaller injuries
Yeah, I mean,
would have probably be ignored. I mean, probably if you break your wrist while fencing, probably they say, come on. It's never. So severe injuries were always logged, but not a lot. I can only remember of two. One, facial injuries, which probably was very bad because it's mentioned, and the guy that injured his hand
okay.
in 300 years. Just,
No, that's a pretty good record actually. I think there are job
um,
sites with far worse records.
obviously, as I said, smaller injuries might have been ignored.
So Dungeon Matron says, I thought knights didn't typically use bows.
That's why I hesitated actually, because there's the concept, there's the general sort of idea that a noble knight would not want to diminish himself by using non-noble weaponry. Um, but the order, like the Templars, had had this vow of obedience. So their honor was still their honor was safe because even if they've been told to wash the floor, it's an honor for them because they are a member of this order and they have to obey the order, etc. Do you get what I mean here? A civilian knight would say, "Oh my God, no, that would destroy my reputation." A knight of Malta or a Templar has the vow of obedience, so they have to do everything. They even had to do hospital duty once a week, if I'm not sure, and they had to go and feed the sick in the hospital because that was they were hospitalers. Um, so I think that general vow of obedience, that's why they were militarily so superior. They didn't have all this, how can you say, bullshit
Yeah, you could say that.
about. Um,
And again, I think it depends on the time period because again, we remember that these guys went from cavalry charges on horseback to sailing galleys around and blowing things up. So it's a very long period of time, and they did use everything they could find.
yeah,
If it
and
could,
in yeah, go.
no, I said if it could hurt people, they were all over it.
Yes. Oh, okay. Not many movies about knights, unfortunately. Oh, no, well, knights in general, yes, but knights hospitalers, no.
Okay, Mike, do not watch Ironclad. That's a terrible movie. Do not go anywhere within 3 miles of Ironclad.
Ooh, movies with knights, the best. Well, I have to admit, with all the inaccuracies, etc., the Kingdom of Heaven was something I enjoyed. For example, it's relatively good.
Okay,
And Andre was mentioning to me that he approves of the fighting in The Last Duel, for example. Let's not mention that half
no, no.
face helmet, but
I mean
otherwise,
that apart, it looks good. I haven't watched
the,
it yet though.
the, the armored fights look good. Noel,
Both are a bit outdated by the 1600s. Balbi mentions Nero being shot in St. Angelo from the Turkish camp with a message on it. The Janissaries are depicted with bows in the Great Siege. No, I mean,
yes, actually,
if Castiglione says, okay, train with the Turkish bow, I don't think he was telling them to do it for health reasons.
exactly. I mean, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. Campaign accurate, no. Close, it doesn't really suck. Exactly. But oh, there's so many then movies that I prefer not to comment really, because then there's artistic license then. I mean, some are like, okay, this looks fair enough, but yeah,
Okay.
pretty close for Hollywood. Uh, I don't know. I'm remembering another movie which I really enjoyed watching with lots of rapier in it is the actor who did Aragorn in Lord of the
Oh
Rings.
yeah, oh, that's a great
Uh,
movie. Alla
Alla
Triste.
Triste.
Alla Triste.
Alla Triste. I mean, that's wow, for example. And there's also quite a few messy battle scenes. What I mean by messy means not Hollywood pretty. So how it actually was. And yeah, that's a good movie actually.
That's a great
It
movie.
was in the Spanish tercios, so that's like 1600s, 1600s.
I think it's a bit later than the period we're talking about, but
They were fighting against the Dutch, etc. So yeah,
lovely movie. So
it represents the Knights of Malta in the 1600s. I mean, the style fits. I mean, contemporary.
yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
So one more thing that you're I tuned in. So maybe you mentioned high standard of bureaucracy. Oh, one question from Jamatra. I tuned in late, so maybe you talked about it before. You mentioned their high standard of bureaucracy and chronicles. Are there any other areas of expertise where they had a technological advance due
by
to
all means, yes. Due?
due to their specific form of organization as an order?
Okay, because I only saw part of the comments.
There's a
Okay, yeah,
second part later on.
yeah. So as you know, as you know, everyone knows that war brings technological advancement. These this order was formed to wage war, wage holy war, and they were active non-stop, literally, even in the 1700s, where people would see that they may have been weaker, that they were always active. So having such a mileage brought they had the best technology and knowledge and people, the best people are in Europe coming over, etc. In fortification building, no doubt there. I'm not a fortification expert, but when they were in Rhodes, they developed bastion systems which were the first in Europe, for example, and then Europe followed along. And Malta, you can just take a look, just Google Malta fortifications and like, okay. So the best people sort of used Malta as their canvas. So that's fortifications. Military excellence, yes. I mean, as we were saying, individual training, etc. Something else totally unrelated is medical care. They had the best hospitals. Why? Because they had the money. And we're talking medieval and early modern. The social services weren't really very popular at the time. So these had hospitals that served food to patients, even poor, not nobility, all patients, in silver plates. And they knew why, and it's written because they are cleaner. They also mention what to feed their patients. This is Crusades. I was reading something about the early 1100s. Today, we eat brown bread because it's healthier, because it's less fattening. But a poor peasant in a hospital bed, a peasant in the medieval times would eat only brown bread because it's coarser. So when he's sick in hospital, they actually wrote, give him white bread because it's more refined, it gives you more energy. True. So, and they had a system of nursing care, they had a system of doctors. So again, the hospital in Malta, the medical school, is one of the first medical schools in Europe, for example.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, in the time that they were still in Jerusalem, the original hospital employed local doctors as well. So they didn't,
Oh yeah.
even if they
Definitely.
were a Catholic order, they still employed Jews and Muslims
Yeah.
to treat
Yeah.
the injured. And when Franco said all visitors, not just the noble ones, it literally meant all visitors. If they were sick, didn't matter what religion or faith they were, bring them in. What they did with them when
Yes.
they were healthy is a different story. But if they were sick,
That, to be fair, the order survived. That the hospital, the order survived, but that hospital, even when the Muslim forces took Jerusalem back, it survived. They allowed it there because it was convenient. Obviously, it's a hospital. But I think it's one of the only things, because when you talk about the nobility, the general agreement would be generally assholes to the poor population.
yeah, I mean they were very
Um,
humanitarian, not just
I
by the
mean, you know,
standards of the time, in general.
exactly. So the feudal system was what it is. But the hospital order had this policy of opening a hospital wherever they had property as well. So you had,
That sort of
which is what they
hospitals.
had today. So a lot of hospitals all over Europe. And what do you have there? This is marketing now. You are providing free medical care to the servants and the nobles of these countries, France, Italy, blah, blah, for free. So the local nobility would say, wow, these are really useful to us. We need to help them. And they would pump in money as a thank you. And also. So it made the circle go around. So hospital care was, yes, it was top as well. They weren't called hospitalers just because it was a tradition. It was what they actually did, not the knights. Very important. A knight hospitaler was not a doctor. When they did the hospital duties, they would just go and see nursing duty and then sort of leave.
So just kind of nursing
Um,
rather than actually
yeah, I mean,
doctoring.
you know, they were warriors, so they employed doctors then. Fair enough.
Okay, we have from Robert Evans, Di Gracia Meyer, Silver or Martinez, and Capoferro or Giganti. Are you asking what we prefer or what they preferred?
Yeah.
Okay, in the meantime, question from Net1 Videos. If you were told you had to go into battle tomorrow in those times, what would you personally choose in terms of armor and weaponry? From what would have been available to you? Hmm. We're talking
So
15th, 16th century, I guess, yeah?
yeah, let's choose a century at least. So so okay, that's 1500s. So I'm assuming a knight as well, for example. Um,
I think I'd
well,
go
I
for a
mean,
battle of cannon.
yeah, I mean, it depends what. I mean, if there's an attack, a galley attack coming over, Rhodes was also marine warfare. We're talking marine warfare after the Crusades. Um, breastplates, sword and shield, or even cutlass, or definitely firearms. Um, I mean, you know, sword would come in only at the end if you really have to. So it's a bit difficult to sort of give one answer to that.
L-
What was definitely sure is there was the armory, the palace armory, and there were armories all over the island, also in Rhodes. And if you were a knight and your weapons were in the villa miles away, you could just go and collect something from the palace armory. A bit like sort of Lord of the Rings, Rohan sort of situation. Hand over the weapons. But yeah, that's why the armory was there. It was a deposit of weapons. And they had little armories all over the island.
Let's see.
Um, so the stock stocks in the armories, stock lists, which gives you an idea of what they would have used in an emergency, muskets or arquebus, again, firearms. And polearms, not many swords. Why? It's quite a guarantee that a knight would have his own sword at his side anyway. So useless stocking up an army with swords. So usually polearms and firearms. 1500s.
Okay, and Robert Evans said, yes, he was talking about which we prefer.
So I haven't read much Silver or Martinez, unfortunately. Sorry, Robert. I know about them, and I know about Silver's ramblings, and not ramblings.
He had very strong opinions.
His opinions. And Martinez is, this is Spanish destreza. Remind me.
I believe so. I'm not very familiar with the Spanish side of things, to be honest.
I have a soft spot for the Grassi simply because, not because it's like an Italian style compared to German, not of the sort. For me, because there is a treatise of the Grassi in Malta. So in the archives of the order, we have the Grassi manuscript treatise and an Agrippa treatise. For who isn't very much into what we're talking about, these are like fencing masters who would have published like a catalogue of what they are teaching, a treatise, which is the only thing we have today as historical fencers as evidence to follow of what of this martial art, basically. So my soft spot for those is because obviously we have them in Malta, so I know that the knights use them. The Grassi I like because I like the Bolognese side sword sort of type of fighting, but I also like rapier. So it's a bit of a mix, and it also depends on what Andre teaches us, so which he does very well. In our system, it's very much Italian influenced, but we don't limit ourselves to one source. It's more of a mixture. Yeah, Agrippa, maths and geometry.
Very good. Okay, Dungeon Matron asked, I was watching Time Team yesterday. West European breastplates were custom fitted and took about a week to make. How many breastplates would a knight have at one time?
Yeah, I can actually spoil
because you have receipts, don't you?
So a knight was obliged to do a list. A knight was obliged to do a report of all his property, because obviously there was a vow of obedience. So we have written evidence of each knight's property, and you have all their weapons. But obviously, why
Franco, we're losing sound.
Okay. I haven't touched anything. Are you hearing me now?
I'm hearing you now.
Okay.
Okay, by the way, in the meantime, I've thrown on screen a plate from Valhausen, which is just to answer Mike's, Net One Video's question from earlier.
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect example of battle warfare. Just use whatever is convenient at the time. I love this. This is so representative.
Yeah,
I mean,
especially
go for it. You do it because it's fun to describe.
Okay, so first you shoot the hell out of each other. If that doesn't work, you stab each other with swords. If you don't have a sword, which is number 3, you try to club him to death with the musket. If you don't have the muskets or swords or whatever, just beat him to death with your helmet. If that doesn't work, you can use the musket stands. If that doesn't work, you can flay him to death with the bandoliers. If that doesn't work, wrestle. If that doesn't work, use a rock. And when you're done, loot the body. So yeah, things get
So
messy. So sorry about that. This image is too good not to share as often as possible. So going back to the breastplates question.
um oh yeah, actually, sorry, correction. A knight was obliged to do this will, to do this checklist of his property every before they go to battle. So every time they had to go on a mission, they had to get a notary official, and they
So
had
it
to
had to
list
be
all their
kept up to
property.
date, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Before they, because obviously when you go on a mission, you can die. So and it has to be updated. I unfortunately I don't have of one specific night, but let's say they had quite a lot. They would not have one. So a really high level knight, so a high ranking officer would definitely have two. Some armors which were Carl was showing in the armory are pageant armors. They're pageantry. They're used for parades and tournaments, etc. They're not used for battles. So one would definitely have the plain, strong, reliable battle breastplate, and then the fancy, one you would wear for a portrait or for a tournament. And I know that there's loads of lists of what property they had, and the only thing I can say from memory is there's a lot of stuff. They had like mini armories. Um,
Speaking of breastplates in particular, apart from the parade ones and the munitions ones, which is just the ones they ordered in bulk to give out to their troops, there are also a few specialist pieces like the Seper armor, which pretty much it's just
oh,
a
of course,
breastplate you
yes,
wear on top of another breastplate,
yes.
just in case you're repairing wall overseeing construction, and there are snipers. They tend to shoot officers, so yeah, extra armor. Robert Evans, I think in your cell, I guess, do you and your compatriots come to grips or wrestle during sparring? Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. Even when we're
Yeah,
not supposed to.
we yeah, we obviously stop when safety becomes an issue because you cannot really safely spar with our personal protection with the mask, etc., and continue the groundwork wrestling at the same time. So yeah, I mean, but we get to a point where we know that okay, one would have the upper hand. Um, but definitely, yeah, we're not going to stop and say, oh, okay, let's start again.
We try not to whack each other too hard. That's just the only thing. Okay. Jumping on to another part of your book, still about swords. One thing I noticed that you mentioned a lot of swords being gifted or relic swords or stuff like that, which is kind of again going to movies and video games. You always have this guy going, "Well done, adventure! Have a sword." And there is a bit of that in history. Not really to an adventure, mostly either as a gift to a country or something like that, yeah, or to a noble or whatever. And there are also a few swords which you highlighted, which were like, okay, this is a very important sword. We do not use this. We hang this up and we show it to visitors. Could you tell us a bit more about those and how this worked, kind of thing?
I mean, yes, that's then. I mean, the book deals with the practical and the symbolic aspects of hospitaller swords. So the other half of the book is basically all symbolism. And the sword then, as in today, was then it kept its today it has still quite meaning as a metaphoric object. It represents nobility, justice, etc. At the time, it did the same thing. Most importantly, one could say even today, but to a lesser extent, because we're more civilized. Um, a sword meant authority. So you had swords of state. Um, so, like putting it simple, like King Arthur, basically, he who holds the sword has the right to rule, and we had that in the Hospitaller Order. Uh, I could show you some images. I mean, do you want me to share or
Yeah, go ahead.
how shall
I,
I share screen?
1 second, I'll switch over on. You should be able to share screen, but let me just. How do I do this?
Well, it doesn't have to. I mean, I think I did send you.
Boink. Okay, try to share screen now.
Oh, I am the host.
Yes, you're the host now. Host away.
Okay, just give me a second so I can show you the proper stuff. Okay, I might as well show you the book parts of it, not all of it, obviously. um, okay, yes, share. Yeah, that is.
Ooh, okay.
Are you seeing
1 second.
pretty swords?
I'll just have to add another one. Hang on in there. Okay, doing some juggling behind the scenes.
I can keep talking basically.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
while you're juggling, just to entertain the people while you're.
Okay, you should have the sword on display now.
I can see it. I don't know if it's on display. You have to tell me because I've got too many screens on.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
this is what you could actually say the sword of the religion. This was given to Grandmaster Deva led by King Philip II of Spain after the victory of the Great Siege. So King Philip gave this to Grandmaster as a gift, as a thank you, basically. And as you can see, it's very bling bling. Definitely not something you would want to use in battle. Someone of a Grandmaster status would have many other swords at his disposition. This would be, definitely ceremonial. But what the Grandmaster did in this particular sword is that he turned it into a symbol of Malta as a state. So it was a sovereign military order, and like the Queen of England would have her sword of state, and Charlemagne had his sword of state, the knights had this.
Okay,
This is another image, for example.
Franco, I just threw the sword, the battle sword on the screen as well.
Sorry?
I just threw the battle sword on the screen as well,
Okay, okay,
just
yeah.
for contrast.
Exactly. So this was a symbolic sword, and it was used in all the ceremonies that the order did from then on. So in the Victory Day celebrations, it was brought out. When a new Grandmaster was ordained, it was brought out, and it was paraded all over the place, etc. Can you see this image?
Rapier of the Holy Roman Emperor
Roman
Maximilian.
Emperor. Yeah. And on the bottom right is the sword of state of the French kings. It is La Joyeuse, the sword of Charlemagne, for example.
Okay, I don't think that's visible on screen.
Okay. But
So you
anyway,
have to.
it's no, don't worry about that.
Okay, okay. But yeah, so
But anyway,
so you're showing basically ceremonial swords as opposed to. Okay, I
yes.
think we can see it now. Sorry
So
about that.
that's not a hospitaller sword. That is La Joyeuse. It's a medieval sword. I mean,
I get you.
so I'm gonna fly past because I shouldn't show you all the book because otherwise I'd be sued. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you
so
still
can
want to
you
encourage people to buy this, yeah?
exactly? So can you see this? Is it visible?
It's the papal stock, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep.
This is a long sword, but I can't imagine using that in sparring. So this is a sword commissioned by the Pope since the 1300s all the way up to the 1700s, every Christmas Day. And every year, the Pope would choose a defender of the faith. One of them was King Henry VIII, before he sort of, changed teams or created his own team. But yeah, so the Pope would give this to a defender of the faith that he would decide would deserve it. But it's ceremonial, that you have the highest authority of the time, which would be the Pope, giving this prince in particular this sword. It's a marketing thing. It's like, okay, so this prince has status more than others because he is a defender of the faith. Proof? Look at my nice sword. So swords used for propaganda, basically, one could say. Heavy political meaning. The list goes on. I mean, that pretty sword that I showed.
Which one?
Coming up. You're still seeing the book, right?
I'm still seeing the book, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I mean, I'm not as fast as you in these things. So.
Neil Gregg, the Baroque Oscars. Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like this is one of them, for example. This is a rape. This is what I showed you as a civilian rape here, right?
1 second, because I think we lost. Hang on. Something strange happened. Don't worry.
What are you seeing?
I'm seeing nothing on the stream right now, so I have to add you in. Just give me a second. Uh, technical difficulties. 1 second.
It's okay. I'm making his life more difficult by.
No, it wouldn't be a proper stream without technical difficulties.
Well, you can see that our favorite sword there, at least, while Karl is struggling. So you could see the difference. I mean, the Devalet sword, which we call the Devalet sword, is there's no decoration. Actually, it has a rosary engraved on the blade, which in close-up there might have been some gold sort of in it, but otherwise it's very plain. And Dungeon Matron said that sword looks painful to hold, beautiful though. Oh, but the other one, yeah, the long sword. Definitely.
I think it's about the sword of the religion.
Yeah. It's okay, Carl, you don't need to. I mean, I was going to show the rapier we showed before. So
Okay,
you don't need to keep sharing.
yeah, I still need to add you back in though because you're currently not visible. Yeah, it would be nice to have you on screen. I think you're audible, just not visible.
Yeah, I
So,
can still
so,
talk.
so don't say anything offensive while you're there.
Okay, any other questions in the meantime? Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. So what the discussion is going on is that it's not practical, not actual
Hey,
weapons.
you're back.
Exactly. Where am I? Oh, hello.
There you are.
So yeah, the swords we're talking about were not not intended to be weapons. They were intended to be symbols.
That said, I think they still had some very high quality blades.
Yeah, I was exactly. So it's a bit like the British, well, not the British, all the military swords today. I mean, there's still
The
some
ones that
famous blades.
they use on parades.
You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, yeah.
I mean, still a very respectable blade. Um, and the Devalet sword, the sword of the religion, the jeweled one, had a proper good blade, but then it was changed because of reasons we don't know, history. So the one in the Louvre, because this sword of the religion is currently in the Louvre, it was actually that's how important it was. So when Napoleon came to Malta, he represented the new way. He represented the republic. He represented removing the state from the church influence, sort of, like modern. Basically, the French Revolution modernized politics. So taking Malta from this holy order was very symbolic to him, and when he came over, I'm not going to say all the story. The knights were practically kicked out because the French military force was like humongous next to the knights.
I think it was also the case that most of the knights were French.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Internal problems. Exactly. The French knights were 50% of the force at the time, and they were, let's say, half of them had problems deciding who to side with, their nation or their order. But anyway, exactly. But there were two swords on the island. There was the papal sword, that big long sword, the papal stock, and there was the sword of the religion, the rapier belonging to the Valette, the golden jeweled one. When he allowed the Grandmaster the time to leave, and he allowed him to take the papal sword with him, because that was something given by the Pope, and Napoleon did not want the approval of the Pope. He did not need it. But the sword of the religion represented, by then, became like a mythical sort of object. It represented the disorder. And like King Arthur's sword, sort of, he definitely took it because that made him automatically, symbolically, as the ruler of Malta. Full stop. So you can take that Pope thing, but I'm keeping this. New times. That's it. I'm the leader. Those swords had a very heavy symbolic meaning.
I think the taking over of a commander's sword is kind of typical of accepting a surrender, I think. Yeah?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, the commander surrendering his sword, basically.
In general, not,
Yes.
not just in this case.
Yeah. I mean, you have sword references everywhere, even in common language.
Oh yeah.
I mean, do you get my point? It's a bit of a double-edged blade here.
Touché.
Etc. So, yeah.
Okay, so are there any other questions about this, or just about the subject in general? We just want to ask Franco as many questions as you like while we have him trapped in here.
There's a question about ceremonial swords wouldn't be sharpened, would they? I have no idea. No idea.
Wouldn't imagine so. I don't know, but no idea really.
I would love to know, because that would mean that I can actually touch one.
If it's sharpened or if it's not sharpened.
Yeah. So, don't know.
I think some of the ones you showed, like the one with the pierce work from the Cathedral Museum, I believe that was used as a personal sword, so that would have been sharpened.
Yes, but that was created as a personal weapon.
And then just happened to become yeah.
Yeah. So that was a sword. The papal stock, even though it was made by the Pope commissions, like the best swordsmiths of the time. So I'm quite sure it would have been a top of the range blade, but who knows, maybe the swordsmith wouldn't have sharpened it so that when this 12-year-old page boy handles it for the portrait, he doesn't slice his fingers off. I would imagine no. Actually, there are some portraits, literally a boy,
Franco,
and I don't think it was sharpened.
Say again, sorry. Could
This
you?
is interesting. Every time I play with my tablet, you don't hear me.
Yeah, it scares me.
Hmm. Anyway, there are images of a page boy holding this
Yeah, of course.
papal sword next to the Grandmaster. And I don't think they were sharpened, to be honest. My personal thought, but
On the
I
other
don't know.
hand, I think Napoleon used to carry the dagger of the legend with him after that.
Yes, yes, but he used it as a letter opener.
Yeah. So I think it would have to have,
So
he either had it sharpened or it was sharp already.
yeah, I mean,
Neil Gregg, would ceremonial swords be all slick with gun oil? Only if someone has been very naughty.
I don't know, Nin. No, again, no idea. I mean, I'm quite sure it's like with the I can't imagine why I'm always referring to the British because even like the American military have ceremonial swords and they polish the heck out of them. That's part of the drill, sort of. I mean, my dad was in the Navy, and he used to say that they would make them polish them until their fingers like really hurt. Um, so I'm quite sure that the sword of the religion at its heyday, I mean, before they take it out for a ceremony, I'm quite sure they would polish it like the local, like one would polish his local silverware. I mean, so I'm quite sure they were highly maintained, so cleaned regularly, etc.
Unknown STQer. Can I call in and discuss this invoice? Not really. Who are you exactly? And let's see. What's we call the page boy Lefty. Yeah, it might happen after an accident. And let's see. So Franco, we're getting close to 2 hours of stream here, which is probably the
Oh wow. Okay.
longest I've ever been streaming. So I think maybe we should wrap up soon. Do you have any other questions or things to add?
Oh, so someone has a disagreement.
A disagreement.
So
So yeah, we're not set up to take calls right now, but if you want to leave comments in the chat or whatever, please feel free to do so.
about which in particular sort of is, we've been speaking about so many things. um, so shall we wait for comment maybe?
Oh yeah, I think we should.
Otherwise, I mean, okay. I mean, today we've been speaking about the order in general as well.
A sharpened ceremonial sword with worth. Yeah,
Fair enough.
that's the typical cartoon thing, yeah.
Fair enough.
A sharpened ceremonial
Ooh.
sword. Yeah, no, we don't need this.
Well, might be a duel coming up. So. Ceremonial sword for knighting ceremonies. In the knighting ceremony, the sound might go. For example, the knights um, held their own swords during the knighting ceremony, and then there was the sword of the religion used. But yeah, I wouldn't know about sharpened or not. Sorry about that. I better not keep trying to comment because I'm not sure.
Your epistemology is all wrong. Epistemology, sorry. Uh,
Um, okay.
tier of knowledge, especially with regard to its method, validity, and scope, and distinction between justified belief and opinion. Ah,
Okay, well, you could buy the book and make a better judgment then, because I mean,
you just want to preach. Not really, no.
I guess. Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, but like Franco said, if you want to argue with him, please feel free to.
Oh yes, of course. I'm actually very happy to have my work judged. That's why it's part of the nervous thing to put it out there, sort of. That's peer reviews of your work. What I definitely, well, that's actually an interesting point. Um, the the work is a master's thesis, as I said, and I decided the publishers didn't really want to, but I decided to keep all the references basically. So it is all referenced work. Um, you know, two reasons. One, to prove that, I'm not inventing things. And two, also to sort of, like what I had with previous books, is to give little windows of where you would want to search this thing in the primary sources. Because, well, maybe it's important that I say that most of the details I'm talking about came from the primary source. So meaning that the archive, not from another book, basically. Because my book would be a secondary source. Well, like this gentleman would be saying, it's Franco saying this. So you would need to look at the original source of information, which is actually very important. That's why I insisted on keeping all the reference lists, like one would have in a thesis, basically. So this is a leisure book. It's full of pictures, etc. But it still has the references.
question, unknown star or whatever. What do you think this book is about?
Oh, sorry. I'm not following the comment. Sorry.
No, because we're having comments like you believe in a book, I believe in Harry Potter. You don't
Oh,
care about
oh, oh,
real
this is
truth.
getting colorful.
It is, yeah. It's getting interesting.
Unknown star. Oh, unknown star. Okay, unknown star. All right. I'm saying what's unknown star.
So yeah, I'm
Um,
kind of confused now, to
yeah.
be honest.
I mean, but everyone is obviously has a right to an opinion. That's
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I have reviews and stuff like that.
very important. I don't believe in a book. I mean, I just wrote what I saw, what I found. Um, very important also that if there's a claim in the book, it's backed by written evidence, by the primary source.
Okay, I'm fairly certain at this point that our visitor does not know what the book is about. But they
Well,
can
I'm quite sure it hasn't happened yet because they just shipped it yesterday.
they can order it here if they like. So if they want to have a debate
So
with you, please go ahead.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, a link.
yeah, I just dropped the link. I mean, that should be a good idea. I mean, people might want to know where to order the book from.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think unless there are further questions, I think we should be wrapping up in a few minutes.
Hmm.
Franco, thank you very much for being here. I know it's been a long day for you.
Yes.
It's much
Yeah, we've been
appreciated.
up to some stuff.
uh, uh,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great having you over. For viewers, we will not be having a stream next week, as Mike from Net1 Videos will be hosting the Tabletop Crafters Guild build for the month. So probably see you over there. Uh, I understand it's not fact, just opinion. I know you're religious. Yeah, it has nothing to do with religion.
No.
Nope, absolutely not.
Okay. Well, yeah, just to
Anyway,
remind people,
nice to see you too.
source of the religion means the order, not religion. Just to point that out, because that might confuse things. Actually, it's true. But anyway,
No, but they could read the subtitle and it should be fine then.
yeah,
Although the subtitle is indeed very long.
yeah, it is a bit long.
Anyway,
Anyway,
thanks Franco, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great week. Bye.
okay, bye.